little bit about my background. I got a bachelor's degree in, I grew up in Iowa. I got a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Iowa State College, and then a master's degree in food science. Food science is the science of processing foods, anything to make them keep, canning, freezing, dehydration, salting, fermentation. And so I studied lots of foods and so on. That's a master's degree. Then I got a PhD in biochemistry, kind of slash agricultural chemistry. Grew up on I can't say I grew up on a farm because it was only 3 acres. Nobody had any money. We couldn't afford a farm, but all I knew was farming surroundings, and so that's my background. The wine industry is really kind of fascinating because I got my PhD in 1958 from University of California, and you might ask, why not Davis? Why at Berkeley and not Davis? Well, the fact is, in 1958 there really wasn't a university at Davis. There was a campus at Davis, but it was an ag extension of the Berkeley campus. And it had no chancellor, for example, a very little organization. And I did go to Davis. I did go there to do research and to pick up onions when I was working on onions, pears when I worked on pears, and lettuce and so on, and wine, grapes and wine. So I did spend time up there, but the Davis campus was just kind of opening up in 1954 when I entered graduate school. I was only 12 when I did that. But 1954, it was the food technology department had been at Berkeley, and it was moved to Davis in 1954. And then about 8 years, and the chairman of the food technology department, Maynard Joslin, was my primary advisor, my PhD advisor, a very well-known name in wine and food. And Maynard A. Joslin and Maynard A. Amarine at Davis, Joslin at Berkeley, are the authors of the book on wine, table wines, and it was the book on wine for at least 50 years, from probably 1930 to even still right now. I use my copy all the time right now, a 1,000-page book, but it had everything you wanted to know about wine. So he was a famous guy. He did not want to move to Davis when the food technology department moved to Davis, and so he insisted that he stay there. So so he retained his title of chairman of the food technology department at Berkeley, and then they elevated a new guy, a guy who became a very close friend of mine, Emil Mrak, M-R-A-K, Emil Mrak. And he became chairman of the food technology department at Davis, and then 4 or 5 years later he was elevated to chancellor at Davis. So that's how it happened. Okay, why did I do this? Why did I take the trouble to write about wine and in the way that it's done? First of all, I insist that this is not an autobiography. I didn't intend it as one. I don't think it is one. People who have read it agree with me that it's a history book. It's a history of the California wine industry from about the repeal of Prohibition until now. But it's a different history book. It doesn't read like an ordinary history book because it's me telling the story. I worked for 6 different wineries, 6 different major wineries and a lot of small ones in the oh God, almost 60 years. It's 58 years I've been in the industry now, since 1958. 1958, I started at Gallo. When I got my degree, I went to work for Gallo starting the first work day of September 1958. And of course they were crushing grapes. I had never seen the complete inside of any winery when I went to work for Gallo. Now I saw parts of wineries, visited Italian Swiss Colony as a student when Joslin took me up there to introduce me to Ed Rossi, who was the production manager. And so I saw a little bit about it, but I never really had seen the whole inside of a winery. I knew quite a bit about winemaking, but I couldn't say that I'd ever really done it, except the picture on the cover, which you almost can't count. I was only 17. It was my dad was a home winemaker during Prohibition, and a 17-year-old kid is going to, when he sees bottles around and grapes out in the yard, you know, you're going to put two and two together. So, so I did make that. That picture was taken in September or October of 1948. I was a freshman at Iowa State at that time. And the first thing they did is they gave me, at Gallo, they gave me one of the lab people to show me around the winery, show me all the facets of the winery. So we went out to the crusher and we saw grapes coming in and being crushed. We saw the people adding yeast, you know, and doing racking and filtering and all kinds of stuff. And he's telling me everything. Then we went over to the bottling line, and they were bottling wine, and they were bottling white wine. Gallo, first of all, was not, Gallo is the largest winery probably in the world right now, certainly in the United States. And it was not at that time. Gallo was number 3. The number 1 winery, maybe you haven't heard of, it was Roma. Roma, headquartered in Fresno, was number 1 winery in size. Number 2 was Italian Swiss Colony. Gallo was number 3. And I wouldn't say it's a distant number 3, but it wasn't nipping on their heels either. It was down there a ways. Roma had a disadvantage of being owned by a liquor company. And as you'll see in the book, liquor companies have just a horrendous record in the wine business. They don't know what they're doing. Worse than that, they think they do. They assume that wine and spirits are identical. They sell them the same way, you sell them to the same people, and of course we know you don't, not at all. And they fail, and they fail miserably. The result was that within about, I started in 1958, by about 1961, Roma just simply disappeared. They just collapsed. The company just simply collapsed. They never gave any reason for it. I never saw anything in any of the literature, any of the papers or anything about how it happened, but Roma disappeared. And there were rumors that they had union problems, the manager didn't know how to handle it, or whatever it was. We don't know. They just kept it quiet. Probably the only smart thing that liquor company did. There was a Shenley company that owned them. Okay, that left Italian Swiss Colony. They were number 2. Well, Gallo did a kind of a, I think I have to say a lucky thing. They were smart, yes, but they also were driven to this. The main, let me go back just a minute. I had tasted all 3 wines from all 3 wineries, Roma, Italian Swiss, and Gallo. I had tasted those before. Frankly, they all tasted alike, and I told them that. They all taste alike. Well, I found out the first day why they tasted alike. They're all made from the same grapes. Thompson Seedless, believe it or not, was the grape that was turned into white wine. Thompson Seedless has a perfect record of never having made a decent bottle of wine in its life. It's a table and raisin grape. It doesn't know how to make wine. It doesn't. There's no flavor, there's no body, there's no color, there's no acidity, there's no tannin. Just a whole lot of sugar and water is all it is. Worthless. Why did they do it? Well, they did it because nothing changed from the repeal of Prohibition. When Prohibition was cooking, there was a huge market that developed for shipping grapes back to Iowa and to my father in Iowa, in Chicago and so on, because everybody made their own wine. It was legal to make your own wine all during Prohibition, provided you didn't sell it. You were not allowed to sell it. You could make up to 200 gallons for your home use as long as you didn't sell it. It was legal. So everybody in the world bought grapes from California. Well, the few tons of wine grapes that there were in California then, I think in 1958 there were not more than 200 acres of Chardonnay in the whole state of California. 200 acres. Now there's hundreds of thousands of acres. But back in 1958, which is not so long ago, at least I remember it very well, it isn't very long ago, those grapes would spoil before they got to Salt Lake City. They could never get back to Iowa before they were spoiled and rotten and so on. They had no hope of getting back to New York or Chicago, where the bootleggers lived, and they were buying huge amounts of wine. So they yanked out the little bit of Chardonnay that was in the ground and the little bit of Pinot Noir and Cabernet. I think Cabernet, there's probably less Cabernet even than Chardonnay, probably less than 100 acres maybe. I don't know that number, but it can't be far off. So there wasn't much, and they were pulled out of the ground. They planted grapes that could ship. They planted table grapes. They planted Thompson Seedless. They planted Aligoté, Alicante. You never heard of those red grapes, but that's what they used. Well, they would ship back there without spoiling. Zinfandel would spoil. I don't think, it probably wouldn't make Salt Lake City either. It's spoiled before it got there. But some of the others, the little bit of Barbera that was around, the little bit of Petit Syrah was there then, but not much. It could probably make it to maybe the Mississippi River, and that's about as far as it'd go. But all those grapes would spoil before they got to the East Coast. There wasn't the refrigeration in trains that there is today, and they simply couldn't do it. So that's why the grapes still existed in 1958. See, when Prohibition was repealed, there weren't any wineries, there weren't any winemakers, nobody knew how to do it. Ernest and Julio Gallo started in 1934, right after Prohibition was repealed. They inherited, I think, 120 acres, something like that, of grapes from their father, and so they decided to go in the wine business. Well, Julio went to the library, and I think there were not more than 2 or 3 books on winemaking there. And he read probably half of one of them and thought he knew how to make wine, and hired a couple of guys from Davis who probably knew less, or not much more anyway. And they were the guys. That's how they started. Sort of like my dad did. He was trial and error, and when I asked him how to make wine when I was going to make it back in 1948, he said, you get some grapes, stomp them all to hell, and let them spoil, and then bottle them. That's it. That's wine. And that's it. And of course, like all home winemakers, I really believed right down in my heart, I believed that I had made one of the finest wines in the world. All home winemakers do. If you know any home winemakers, ask them, was their wine any? They go, oh yeah, it was good. They'll tell you it's the best wine there ever was. And actually, I only had 1 bottle explode in my car, so I felt pretty good about it. Anyway, we came to the bottling line when they were showing me the thing, Gallo now, and they were making, we were crushing Thompson Seedless grapes. They were bottling Thompson Seedless wine. The white wine at Roma, the main white wine that they were selling in those days, was called Sauterne. Sauterne. They had 3 sweetness levels. The dry Sauterne was gaggy sweet. The sweet Sauterne, or the medium Sauterne, was really sweet. And then the sweet Sauterne, you couldn't pour it. It would just drip. It's sort of like honey. Well, that was Sauterne. Gallo had the same thing. 3 Sauternes, all made out of Thompson Seedless. No wonder they all tasted alike to me when I was trying it back as in graduate school. Same thing for the red wines. Aligoté. Who makes wine out of Aligoté anymore? They don't even do that in Provence. I mean, nobody, Algeria, they just pull them out of the ground. Alicante, same thing. Those grapes you just don't use anymore. There's a grape called Fersegos, which is a white grape, and you don't use that one either. They just, all those, you couldn't use them, but that's what they had. And so that's what they made. No wonder the public was uninterested. No wonder the public would hardly buy wine, and they did it more or less for the alcohol. They did it for the same reason they bought alcohol or bought wine during Prohibition. In that respect, it was kind of similar to what the liquor people thought, because it was all beverage alcohol, baby. That, you know, the more the better. That's what they said. And okay, so the bottling line was going here, and the bottles were clinking, and of course nobody used corks. It was all screw caps, and they were rattling along there, and I thought, admiring how fast it was going, and all of a sudden everything came to a screeching halt. it just stopped. And I look at my watch, and it wasn't lunchtime, it wasn't a break time or anything. And the people on the line obviously weren't going on a break, they're just standing there. So I said, what happened to a guy who was walking by? Oh, he says, that's nothing, it's a label change, don't worry about it. And he said it kind of fast. And I thought, label change, did I hear what I thought I heard? Label, how can you change a label without changing other things? Well, anyway, I thought I'd watch, so I stood there. And he went over and got a little cardboard box, brought it over to the labeler, and he took out the labels from the labeling, put it in one corner, took new labels out of his box, put it in there, started up the bottling line again, and clink, 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 going like the devil again. I went over to the case-in end. The case-in is where the bottles are put into the cases, and then they're sealed up and shipped out. I looked at the label of the new label, and it said Chablis. The interesting thing about this is that Ernest Gallo was doing a test. He was going to test in Houston, and somebody had told him that the public might be getting tired of the Sauterne name, and maybe you ought to try something new. Well, let's test it. Ernest was always great for testing things. So he bottled enough for the Houston market, and he tested that. But I think the interesting thing about all of this is that about maybe 3 months, 4 months later, I heard from the sales department that for some reason, the American public, at least in Houston, they like the Chablis an awful lot better than they ever liked the Sauterne. The wine is just better, and that's all there was to it, and they insisted it was better. So he went quickly to, we bottled more the next 3 months or 4 months or so, and within about, I think, less than 2 years, you couldn't find a bottle of Sauterne on any shelf anywhere. Roma had changed to Chablis, Italian Swiss Colony changed to Chablis, Gallo changed to Chablis. Same wine, same bottle, same label, same cap, same everything. Well, I thought that was really kind of interesting, you know, that this is an industry that, that maybe I ought to pay more attention to. I made a mental note to start with, and then I started finding other things going on. Some of them are in the book, you'll read that. Incidentally, I should say the library does have copies here. I gave 3 copies to this library, 1 I think to Yountville, 2 to St. Helena, and of course Naomi has them back there at the book mine, and you can get them on Pearl Street. So you can find them all around. There's business cards I put on the thing there, just phone numbers and so on, and also the sheets that look like this that are on the table out there. You're welcome to take one. Is really kind of fascinating. It's this book won a major international book award, and I didn't even know there was such an award. I got a letter from a guy named Edward Cointreau. Cointreau, you recognize, is the fairly famous flavored cognac. And the Cointreau family has been doing that in France for 700 years, more than 700 years. And they make a lot of wines, they make a lot of spirits, flavored spirits, and so on. And Edward, I've never met him, but he wrote me a nice letter, just terrific. Very pleased with the book. He's read it several times, and it tells the story on that paper. It won the best, in his judgment, it won the best book about wine for, what happened? Anyway, it won the best book on wine written in America this last year. Edward picked the 10 runners up. That's not quite loud enough. The 10 runners up from various countries. There was Australia, I think South Africa, France, maybe a couple of them in France, Spain and Germany. Anyway, there were 10, and this one won in America. And then, what was it, Sandy? A month later, maybe something like that, we got notified that this book won overall of all those 10. So that's kind of interesting, and there'll be the PR announcement. I think there's a ghost in here. They're following me. Anyway, I started. I won't tell you any more about the boring thing about awards, but the publisher. The publisher told me that she did not enter it. She has won awards. Some of her books have won awards there before, but she said I didn't know. I don't know how he learned about the book. We released it last August, and suddenly they found it, and yeah, that's great. Thank you. And this is my wife, Sandy. She is the editor of this book, and I'll digress just for a minute. When it took about 3 years to write this book, and I was pretty proud of it when I'd done it, because you know, you do something for 3 years, you're going to be proud of it, or you shouldn't do it. And we had to. It was done in Microsoft Word, but they don't publish in Microsoft Word. They publish in InDesign. You can do the spacing of letters and so on, and the words a lot better in InDesign. So in translating from Word to InDesign. Fight in that bottle. From Word to InDesign, you end up with what's called widows and orphans. You'll end up with a page with only 2 words at the top of the page, maybe, or something that doesn't look right. And so then you're forced to go back and rewrite that whole paragraph and make it so that it comes out more or less even at the end of a line, end of a page, or at least closer than it was before. That's pretty good. I wonder what grape they made that out of. What I did at the same time is Sandy is an avid reader, and that makes her an excellent editor. But we didn't know it. I didn't know it. She didn't know it. And so. When I was rewriting these various paragraphs, and it was all through the book, you got to completely rewrite it more or less when you go into a new software like InDesign. And I thought, well, I wasn't sure this sounded quite right, and maybe I better run it by her. And the example I like to use happened. I worked all day one time. All day I slugged it out. I got about 5 pages written. Handwritten. I hadn't typed it yet, just handwritten, and typed it up, and I gave it to her to check. And no, I did it. I think handwritten. She it wasn't typed yet, and I gave it to her to edit. And I said, please check this out, and clean it up if necessary. I thought she might make 1 or 2 little small things. It wouldn't be unimportant. And then she came back, and one page had a great big X all over the page, throw the page away, and then there's one other paragraph that would have a sentence circled, and move this 16 pages back to page whatever it was and fit in that, and then I'd go back 16 pages back, and she'd have that page with here. Insert here, and it turned out that paragraph was the same subject that the sentence was. I write like I talk. I start on one subject, and then I ramble, and I go off in directions. Lots of whys. You take the left turn, the right turn, go straight ahead, whatever. Lots of them. And I think this is off now. Maybe I don't need one, I don't know. So anyway, it makes you mad at first, when you work for 8 hours doing that, or 10, or however many hours I worked. But then I did a very smart thing. I'd go ahead and type it up the way she did it, and then I didn't read it. I waited until tomorrow to read it, and it turned out it's a lot better than what I had written the first time. So I started trusting her more, and so we got through it. Well, that cost us an extra year. It took a whole year for Sandy and me to redo it. So she edited this book, and the story's mine. I wrote the whole thing, but the reason it flows well is her. All right, I started at Gallo, I started noticing other things after that, the Chablis thing that worked so well for them. Gallo had started a new product. They were stuck with what they had. They had Thompson Seedless and they had it coming out the ears. They had most of California was covered with Thompson Seedless grapes. After all, it's a table grape, it's a raisin grape. That's all it is, but people also at the time, growers at least, thought it's also a wine grape. Well, of course it isn't. But so there were all these grapes, and Gallo had to crush what there was. If they wanted a white wine, they got your choice. You got Thompson Seedless, or you got Thompson Seedless, or you got Thompson Seedless, and you can make it out of one of those three. And so that's what they did. Well, they knew that they'd figured out that you can't make decent wine out of it, so they got a clever idea, and I think they were lucky at the same time. There were people who were mixing white port, which you made out of Thompson Seedless, of course. They were mixing white port and lemon juice, and just squeezing lemon juice right into the wine. Well, it's gaggy sweet, so the acidity in lemon juice is going to help it. It can't hurt. And the lemon flavor, everybody likes lemon flavor. There's something about it. Nobody likes to eat lemons, but everybody loves lemon flavor. I got a feeling I'm doing this, but I don't know how I'm doing it. So they put a little bit of lemon flavor in this gaggy sweet Thompson Seedless wine, and it just sold from day one. It exploded in sales. Before the end of that year, they were selling something like 1 million cases a year, from nothing to 1 million in 1 year. Next year it was 2 million, then 3, then 5, then 7. There was about a 40-year period. They started this in 1957. They started the year before I went there. And from then to about 1987 or 88, when they finally got rid of Thompson Seedless altogether and started, they called it Thunderbird, first of all, the famous wine Thunderbird. Lemon flavored Thompson Seedless junk, and it sold like mad. It was very sweet, high alcohol, and so on. But Thompson Seedless started running in short supply after a while, after 30 years, when people started pulling it out and realizing it isn't a wine grape. After the industry stopped making Thompson Seedless into wine. So it started disappearing, and they started making it out of apple or pear. Now, why not? Apple and pear don't have a lot of flavor either. They got a lot more than Thompson. Everything has a lot more than Thompson. But they started making out of apple or pear. They could buy apple concentrate or pear concentrate from Argentina. Whichever was cheapest is the one they used. And they ran it through, when I was there, we ran it through a carbon column as we did Thompson Seedless. God knows Thompson Seedless didn't have any flavor, but we wanted to strip it even more because the little bit of flavor that Thompson Seedless does have is bad. I think you probably knew that already, but there's not much there, but whatever it is bad. So we ran it through a carbon column. You treat it with carbon, and carbon absorbs, everything, and so you could run the Thompson Seedless wine down through, or upflow, we did upflow. You run it through and all the bad stuff would be absorbed. Whatever flavor there was would get absorbed onto the carbon, you grab it and hold it, and then the wine would come out water white, taste like water except sugar in it, a lot of sugar, a lot of alcohol in it, and then they added the lemon and everybody was happy. And so that 30 or 40 or 50 year period, Gallo was selling, they averaged between 7 and 8 million cases every year for all of that. And it made nothing but money because, it's sugar and water, so it made a lot of money. Italian Swiss Colony, the winery number 2, had a terrible disadvantage. They were owned by a bunch of Thompson Seedless growers. Well, you try to get those growers to put Zinfandel, Barbera, Petit Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, some decent grape varieties. They're not going to do it. They're getting 16 tons per acre of Thompson Seedless. The Cabernet, what do you get, 3, 4, 5 tons at the most? Good quality wine, you'd probably get 3 tons. What do you get, Bob? 3 or 3.5, something like that? Yeah. Okay, so now with the new clones of it, you can get as much as 5 and good rootstock and so on, and with good quality. And but with Thompson going out, then they got rid of it altogether and went to apple and pear, and the carbon column worked like a charm on apple and pear. It got rid of whatever apple or pear flavor was there, and nobody knew the difference. They still thought they had their good old lovely Thompson Seedless wine in the first place. Nobody actually knew. I don't think the consumer actually knew it was made out of Thompson Seedless. They just knew it was that really good Thompson or good Thunderbird wine, and it was marketed very well and fairly cheap. Okay, Italian Swiss Colony had a big disadvantage. They were owned by the Allied grape growers, a bunch of Thompson growers. Gallo had gone under a program of, right from when I first started there, Giulio got the idea there's something wrong with our wine. We could make it better. Not in the lab, you have to have better grapes. And so he started their own program. Gallo had something like 20,000 acres, I think, of grapes at that time. It'd grown from 1933 to 1958, 25 years. And they already had quite a number of grapes. And much of it was not Thompson Seedless. It was a good red, they didn't have Pinot Noir or Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Cabernet, Sauvignon. They didn't have any of the really quality ones, but they did have Zinfandel, Barbera, Syrah, Petit Syrah, French Colombard, Chenin Blanc. They had good varieties. They just weren't as good as Chardonnay and Pinot Noir and Cabernet. And so Giulio was feeling pretty good about this. He was moving along. The company was growing. They were now number 2 because Roma was gone. So they were behind Italian Swiss, and Italian Swiss was the enemy. And they were the people that I was to fight all the time in making wine, and all the new products that I made for Gallo and helping with the old products and bottling. We came out with Hardy Burgundy. We didn't put any Alicante or Aligoté in there. We put Petit Syrah, we put Ruby Cabernet, we put Barbera, good grapes. The best of the Zinfandel that was not overcropped, we put it in that wine and made pretty darn good wine. The Chablis, very shortly, maybe 3 or 4 years after it first was born in 1958-59, the Chablis started to be made out of French Colombard and Chenin Blanc. French Colombard's got a lot of acidity, not a lot of its backbone is what it's got, and Chenin Blanc's got a very nice flavor. Chenin Blanc on its own tastes like new mown hay, but blended with Colombard, it's good. It's really good. Not Chardonnay, of course, but it's really good compared to whatever that grape is, that Thompson Seedless. And so Giulio was feeling good about it, and the company was doing pretty well, so that they were, it got so that when Gallo announced the price for grapes, because they're buying grapes every year, every company, the big companies bought grapes. Well, Gallo was going to buy grapes, and every year by June, Giulio Gallo would put out the price. And there'd be a price for Thompson Seedless, price for French Colombard, price for Chenin, price for Zinfandel, and so on. And when he announced the price, he noticed, all of us noticed, by about 62, 63, 1964 maybe, we started noticing that when Gallo established a price in June, it was accepted by the whole industry. So Giulio got a clever idea, very, very clever. Giulio announced, and I think it was 1965, maybe 66, he announced the price for Thompson Seedless up to then had been the $50, $60 range a ton. $50 to $60 a ton, that's how worthless it was. He announced $105 a ton for Thompson Seedless. $105 a ton, unbelievable. Well, that meant that the Allied growers people are going to collect $105 a ton for all their grapes that they sell to Italian Swiss Colony. Bankrupting Italian Swiss Colony is what it did. Okay, so the guy, grower who had some Thompson Seedless, he calls Giulio Gallo and says, Giulio, I got some, I'm located down in Madeira. I've got some Thompson Seedless I want to sell. You giving $105? Giulio says, yes, sir, $105. So he says, well, I got 30 tons here, And Julio said, well, let me see, you got any Colombard? No, I don't have any Colombard. You got any Chenin Blanc? No, I don't have any Chenin Blanc. Got any Reds? Any Zinfandel? No, I just got Thompson. Julio says, well, where are you located exactly? Oh, I'm on Road 22 and right there by the highway. Oh, yeah, I see it here, Julio would say. He'd rustle some papers on the phone. He'd say, yeah, we have already bought all the Thompson from your area that we're going to be needing. So we won't be buying your Thompson this year. Okay, if another grower would call him and say, Julio, I got 10 tons of Thompson Seedless, I want to sell you for 105. And Julio said, well, that's what we're giving, that's what we're paying. Where are you located? Oh, I'm over here a little north of Fresno, over in the, or almost on the hills there. And Julio would say, well, do you have any French Colombard? Yeah. I said, I got 10 tons of French Colombard too. But the one I really got, I got Chenin Blanc. I got 25 tons of that. And Julio would say, okay, I'll take them all. Well, he ended up paying maybe $110 for the Colombard and Chenin Blanc, $105 for the Colombard. But that was French Colombard and Chenin Blanc that Italian Swiss didn't get. They were stuck with all those Thompson Seedless. Within a year's time, Italian Swiss was bankrupt. They had to sell their company. They sold it to Hubline, and big spirits company. And they didn't have decent wine. They didn't have good wine. They had all Thompson Seedless and all the schlock red grapes that weren't worth having. And so Gallo, on the other hand, had great wines. Colombard, Chenin Blanc, Zinfandel, and so on. And so sales at Gallo just exploded. And they followed Thompson Seedless, followed Thunderbird, the Thompson Seedless that used up the grapes that we didn't have any use for. And that was what happened. So Gallo jumped into the lead by about 1965, 66. And within about 3 years' time, Gallo was double the size of number 2, Italian Swiss Colony. Now, you can argue that that was dishonest on the part of Julio. Well, that's what business people do. That's what I learned at Gallo. Well, every time I saw these things happen, from the Chablis, the Sauterne to Chablis, and the fact that the public believed that the Chablis was just a heck of a lot better wine than the Sauterne, I made notes and I put them in paper, and I bring memos sometimes if a memo proved the point. And I think way back then, 1950s, 60s, I was planning that at some point I'm going to want to tell this story, because God knows most of the wine books in the world are pretty boring, and they really are. You know, the average wine book that you find turns out to be some guy, some writer. He's taking a trip through France and going to start in the north. He starts in Champagne or Burgundy. He'll go down through Beaujolais, maybe over to Chablis, down to Sauterne and Bordeaux, or maybe over to the Rhone and down into Provence, where the good dessert wines, and all the way along here. He takes notes, he'll stop, and his book will read like this. It'll say, it was a magnificent day in June. We started driving from Paris over to this chateau at Burgundy, and we drove there on a beautiful spring day or summer day, and we noticed there was a guy out mowing the lawn in the front. We didn't see any cars there, but the guy was mowing the lawn. So we parked the car, and he stopped mowing the lawn and came over and asked us what we wanted. Well, we want to visit the winery. Oh, okay, I'll show you. So he turned out to be the winemaker. He turned out to be the winery manager. Okay, he gave us wonderful tasting, marvelous wines. We thought they were magnificent. Tasted 3 or 4 vintages, and then we thanked him and then moved on. Well, it says that in the book. Then they drove a little further to another chateau, and there wasn't anybody mowing the lawn. The lawn didn't look very good, in fact, but they had 4 or 5 other people in a group that had come from Paris, and we joined that group. So we went to a tasting, and the winemaker poured some wines for us. We got to taste them, and oh, they were magnificent wines. Tasted 2 or 3 vintages, they were magnificent, and then we bid him goodbye and bought a bottle or 2 and went on. And we drove on to here. Well, the whole crazy book reads that way, and they're boring. They're boring books. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to you know, to write something that would tell somebody something they wanted to know. I really did have in mind, I was aware of the history of the California industry, how it went from grapes like Thompson, Seedless, and Aligoté, and so on, how it went from those grapes to Chenin Blanc and Colombard, which was a huge step forward. The wines were much, much better. That's pretty good. And then they finally, another 20 years passed when the public got used to Colombard and Chenin Blanc. Very, very nice wines. They weren't as sweet as they used to be. They somehow, people got the drier taste, they liked it. Then Chardonnay showed up here and there, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, grapes that we now recognize as pretty good. And then the growers in the state of California started noticing, you know, the Pinot Noir grown here isn't as good as it is grown over there. Wonder why that is. Well, it's a lot colder over there. Maybe that's it. So he planted Cabernet in both places. Son of a gun, the Cabernet is no good where it's cold, but it's terrific where it's warm. The Pinot is the opposite, and they started noticing that, and I noticed it. So all the way along, as these things happened in the industry, some of the people like Giulio Gallo made terrific decisions, business decisions. Ernest Gallo, very sharp guy, and there's one that those of you who have read the book, I think were pretty interested to find that when I was supposed to make a very high alcohol wine for them, they wanted a wine. Ernest always had the, I think he had a secret mean streak in him that he wanted to get the other guys, and he didn't like the liquor people, and he wanted to stick it to the liquor people, and he asked me to make a wine that tasted like whiskey sour. Well, whiskey sour has got a very strong lemon flavor, and in fact, I used the same flavors that we'd been using for Thompson Seedless, or for Thunderbird, and a different amount, put more lemon flavor in. So it was sweet again, but this time it was very high alcohol. It had to be, the legal limit for wine is 21%. Well, I made this one 20.9. I mean, I got right up there as close to the limit as possible, and made a wine that a strong whiskey sour has a strong bourbon flavor, which is woody, very oaky, American oak bourbon flavor. So I put lots and lots of oak character in it. Got from oak chips, and we didn't have any barrels. Gallo couldn't afford barrels, or they thought they couldn't. And so the oak chips worked like a charm, the heavy lemon flavor. Ernest Gallo came to me and he said, Dick, he said, I don't think that the way we taste this wine is going to work on this kind of wine. And of course we had been, you sip it, you smell it, you sip it, you spit it out, you smell it, sip it, spit it out. Never, never, ever swallow. And I didn't swallow in 58 years in tasting wine at a winery. And but he said this time, he says, I think to really get the taste of this wine, I know it's high alcohol, but to get the taste of this wine, we got to swallow it. And I said, well, maybe, but how do we do that? Well, he says, I want you to come in on Saturday. We're closing the winery Saturday, but Giulio and I will be here. I want you to pour us these wines. Nobody will be around. And so we're going to swallow them. So I thought, well, okay. And I have been swallowing at home at night. I take it home and sometimes new products that I was always making. Heidi, my daughter, is here, and Heidi Baron, who's herself a very well-known winemaker, but at the time she was a little girl and she had a terrific taster. And so I'd use her, and little kids do have an immature tasting ability, but it's very sharp. They're very sensitive to little differences in taste. And so I'd bring home samples. I got to do this, and Heidi and her sister got to taste wines all the time from little girls all the way up, and they'd spit out. I taught them how to do that, and they helped me a lot of times in knowing, because that infantile tasting ability is what you want sometimes. Okay, I had tasted some of this wine, and I had actually swallowed it at home because I suspected that that was maybe what Ernest said might be the truth. And so, but I did it at home and didn't go out driving or anything, and it worked out all right. And I didn't drink a lot of it. Well, anyway, the Saturday came, and Julio and Ernest showed up, and we started. And I mean, I never had so much fun, but I never worked so hard. It was a race against alcohol. And I got my pen going, and and Julio would say something, and I'd write it down. Ernest would say something, write it down, try this, talking. And I couldn't write as fast as, I didn't want to miss anything. I should have had a recorder, but I didn't know it at the time. And finally, and it didn't take very long, probably half an hour, and I was just tired of writing. I was scribbling as fast as I could go. And finally, Julio came over, and he put his arm around me, and he called me Pete. He put his arm on me, he says, "Pete, you've done a damn good job this, but I gotta get home," he says. And when I saw them, they both went arm in arm, which I hadn't seen them do that ever before. Arms around each other, walking down this long stairway from the lab upstairs down to the bottom. And each one, I knew they each had Ernest had a green one, Julie had a blue Cadillac. They always had new Cadillacs every year. And I knew they were gonna drive home, and they had to go through town. Both of them had to go through town over to Maze Road where they both lived, and just east or west of Modesto. And Ernest was well known for speeding through red lights. It didn't matter. He's an important man, and zoom, he went. And I went with him several times for lunch where we had things to talk about with the sales manager. And so I just had my heart in my throat, the whole time, because he'd go through that 14th and D stoplight or red light, and the cars would stop for him. He'd just go screaming through. He got so interested in what he was doing. He's talking the whole way that he'd scream. That was the way he'd drive to the restaurant there where we'd have lunch, and then coming back, same thing. Didn't drink anything at lunch. Well, he might have had a beer, I guess, but. Anyway, that Saturday, I really worried about it. I really wondered whether they were going to make it home. And then Sunday came, and I didn't hear anything on the news. Monday morning, I got to work, and their cars were there, and they weren't dinged up or anything. And so it must have worked. So no one ever said a word about that. I never heard from either one of them again. But they went ahead and tested the thing, and this time, this is where Ernest had liked to use the gotcha on the spirits people. He tested it in Memphis, spirits country, and of course it failed. And he accused Julio, thought, well, those damn liquor people, they poisoned it for us. They poisoned the market for us. They told everybody, don't try that wine, And so they changed the name of the wine, went to Indianapolis the second time, and it failed there also. So Ernest said, well, then it's a bad idea, we won't do it. So that wine never hit the market, actually. But I never will forget that little thing, and I wrote a little note about it. And after 20 years, I started having boxes full of notes. Mm-hmm. And after 30 years, more boxes full of notes. And then at some time, Heidi's daughter, Remy, saw that box of those boxes. There must have been 3 or 4 of them. In about 1980, and she said, "Grandpa, you've got to get busy on this." And I said, "Well, you can help me if you want to. I've got to have these things filed. What's the subject is, the date, and so on. I want it chronologically done." So she did it. She did a pretty good job, but not a complete job. Sandy is the one who finished that job, and that was what started this, and that's how I did it. So the intention was to tell the truth about the history, but tell it in a fun way. And by all means include all the little happenings where the people who screwed up, I just named them, and at my age, what are they going to do to me, So I wrote the people who did good things, I wrote. The people who did bad things, I wrote. I don't fear them because I got the notes, I got the proof here. So Sandy wants me to throw away all these notes. I don't dare throw them away because I might need them in court someday. I don't know. Anyway, that's the story of this book. It goes on down to Hugh Blind that bought Italian Swiss Colony, They were a spirits company, and of course they didn't know what they were doing, but they thought they did. And they bought the company that Beaulieu Vineyard, up here, Beaulieu, the winery in the Napa Valley in those days, and it owned the Cabernet market. But Heublein, the first thing they did is send a guy named Don Jackson, out to do a survey of how these wines were made. They wanted to know the cost of each of the wines. Well, Cabernet Sauvignon, private reserve Cabernet at BV, was very expensive wine. Back in those days, it was $1.98 a bottle. Can you imagine? $1.98 a bottle. And Thunderbird, for example, was sold at 59 cents a bottle, and maybe get a half gallon for 79 cents or something. And most of the wines in the country were under $1. Well, Beaulieu Private Reserve, $1.95. That was pretty hefty price back in the 1950s and 60s. And it wasn't an easy sale. Well, Heublein wanted to know the cost of goods. Well, I told him that, I told Don Jackson that we used Cabernet Sauvignon grapes. We aged it in barrels 2 full years, then we bottled it, then we aged it in bottle 2 more years before we released it. The wines were almost 5 years old when they were released. And we got $1.95 a bottle for our trouble. Well, we had just started. Andre Chablis, who was at Beaulieu Vineyard before me, and most people know his name. Famous guy and a fabulous guy, very, very excellent thinker, just a smart guy, and he deserves all the credit he gets. He had started a new wine called Gamay Beaujolais. It's a clone of Pinot Noir, and grown in the Beaujolais region, just south of Burgundy in France. And he had started a new wine, and we had just bottled it. We crushed the first grapes. He planted them 4 or 5 years earlier. We crushed the first grapes in 1968, my first crush year there at BV. And I was at Gallo 10 years and then moved to BV in Napa Valley. We crushed them in 1968. Well, Beaujolais doesn't get any barrel age, and it doesn't get any bottle age. You crush it, you start bottling. You know, in France, the people in Beaujolais sell the first Beaujolais of the year in November every year. It's only crushed in October, or sometimes August, or September, I mean. But September, October, so a couple of months later it's bottled, and then they release it a month or 2 later. Usually released February 1st, something like that. And they have a big celebration when they release it and tell the world how marvelous it is, because it's got no age and no nothing, just the Beaujolais grape. Okay, Don Jackson said that the Beaujolais grape the wine is much, much cheaper than Cabernet. And so I swear to you, this is the truth. He proposed that, he told us that he was going to propose to Heublein that they drop Cabernet Sauvignon, eliminate it. BV owned the Cabernet market. They could do anything they wanted. Could have raised the price, and they did, of course. But they're going to turn Beaulieu Vineyard into a Gamay Beaujolais winery. That's what we got from the spirits people. We really argued, and we fought and fought to keep them from doing that. But we always knew they probably would do it later on if we left. And of course I did leave after a while when they decided to put me in charge of, they bought Italian Swiss Colony, so they owned the Asti winery and all those Thompson Seedless grapes. And they offered me the job of technical director of their whole company, all the wines that I'd made wine for them in Portugal and Lancers, the Lancers product that was a big seller. And it had been very successful, and they're going to put me in charge of all the wineries they own: Inglenook, BV, Italian Swiss, Gancia in Italy, and Lancers in Portugal. And I said, yes, I can do that. And they said, well, when can you move? And I said, what do you mean move? Well, you have to move to the corporate headquarters, the Hartford, Connecticut. I said, I can't make wine in Hartford, Connecticut. Nobody can make wine in Hartford. You don't understand what we're trying to do for you, they said. Well, I ended up having to resign and move on to another company, because they just simply didn't understand that you make wine by smelling the tanks every day, tasting the wine. when something goes wrong, you don't have very much time to fix it. You've only got a few days or it'll spoil on you. So, because it is alive, you know, and so you have to do it. I never could get them to understand that. And of course they failed as well. They had to sell their company, the Hugh Line, down the road a little ways.